See how they do. Okay, anyway, talk about everyone there. And let's carry on where we left off. And as you may recall, we're talking about the Buddha's about to pass away. And he's saying that he's 80 years old, his body's falling apart, and all of these kind of things. And as you can imagine, the next thing that's going to happen is that he's going to say something about where to take refuge. Yeah, this is what comes up next year. This next passage is, to my mind, very interesting and very profound, and it says a lot about what Buddhism really is about. So he says that his body is only comfortable when he goes into the sightless immersion. Immersion, that's Sujato's translation of samadhi. So immersion, stillness, samadhi, whatever your preference might be. And then he says, so Ananda, be your own island, your own refuge. We know of the refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge. We know of the refuge. And how does a mendicant do this? The mendicant, or layperson, whoever really. It's when a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. So this, of course, is the 4 sutta-paṭṭhanas coming up. And then you have the same for the 3 other sutta-paṭṭhanas. Let's stop there for a second. So the Buddha is obviously concerned about the Sangha and everyone taking himself as a refuge. And this is a reminder that you cannot take anything in the world as a refuge. Things in the world are just inherently unreliable, inherently out of control, inherently slippery, inherently changing, impermanent, all of these things. And as long as we take things in the world as a refuge, what does that mean? It means we attach to things in the world. As long as we do that, we're asking for suffering. We're saying, please, may I suffer? That's what we're saying. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? So we hold on to the things in the world, and this is kind of deeply problematic because it always will lead to suffering down the track. So there is only one way of dealing with that, and that is to take refuge somewhere else. And of course, the primary refuge in Buddhism is always the triple gem, the triple refuge, the Tisarana, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and the Aryan Sangha. But here the Buddha focuses on the Dhamma for obvious reasons, because the Buddha is about to pass away. The Dhamma is what is left over. The Dhamma is like it's almost like the living proof of the Buddha in a sense, which carries on into the future. The Sangha is much more hard to define. You don't really know who the Sangha is. It's a bit more theoretical or abstract in a sense what the Arya Sangha is. The Dhamma is what we have, like we can really get our hands on. We know what it is. These are the teachings of the Buddha. So that is your refuge. These are the principles that relate, that have to do with how the world actually works. The principles of spiritual practice. Eternal things that don't have a use-by date. You don't go, it doesn't say to the back of the paṭicca, used by such and such a date. There's no such thing, unfortunately. It just carries on. Because these are general, universal principles of the world that are always valid. So take the Dhamma as a refuge. We get that. But then take yourself as a refuge. That is kind of more unusual. What is that? How can you take yourself as a refuge? I always feel when I've been thinking, I'm deluded. How can I take myself? I don't really, what do I know? What can I take myself as a refuge? It's kind of madness taking myself as a refuge. And of course, the answer is it doesn't mean, what it means is that at the end of the day, we are the ones who make the choices in our lives. We are the ones who have to if you want to walk the spiritual path, you have to take responsibility for yourself, ultimately. And it means that you have to be careful, you have to be circumspect, you have to live your life with wisdom. It is not as if we can put our spiritual well-being into the hands of someone else. We cannot say, I believe in such and such a spiritual teacher. Whatever they say, I will say amen and just kind of do follow along. It doesn't work. If we do that, it is kind of a blindness on our part. You can't do that because at the end of the day, you also have to follow, decide on which spiritual teacher to follow, right? So in the end, we are the ones who make the judgments in our life about how to live. We have to take that responsibility. And that responsibility always means being circumspect, always be careful, always listen. Don't take things on blind faith. Blind faith is not part of how Buddhism works. It is perhaps the part of some other religions, maybe, depending on how you practice them, but it's not really part of Buddhism. And yet there are a lot of people in the Buddhist world who do exactly that. Yeah, or so-and-so said so it must be true. No, so-and-so said so, maybe it's true, maybe it's wrong. You better check it out. Don't take it as kind of the absolute truth. Even with the suttas, we have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes there's weird stuff in the suttas. I always take the suttas seriously. If the Buddha says something that seems to be weird on the surface, I always kind of think about it, reflect on it. I may not agree with it straight away, but at least I give it a chance, give the Buddha a chance to kind of allow these things to percolate into my kind of stubborn mind, yeah, and see if there may be some truth to it. And often you find out that what you reject in the beginning, eventually you come around and you say, actually, the Buddha's probably right about this. But sometimes there are things in the suttas which is okay to reject because we need to remember this is an ancient textual tradition. So even if the Buddha was right about everything he said, presumably he was, still the actual textual tradition is very likely to be a little bit corrupted. If everything is impermanent, if everything in the world is unreliable, well, the same must surely be true for a textual tradition. There's going to be little corruptions in there, a bad memory of certain monastics, transcription errors, etc., etc. This is just the way things are. This is just the nature of impermanence. So in the end, we have to rely on ourselves. But the real way of relying on ourselves, taking yourself as a refuge, the Buddha says here, is by practicing the satipatthana practices. That is the real refuge. And why is that? Well, it is precisely because when you practice satipatthana, you are going inwards. You're no longer taking the world as a refuge, but you're taking your inner states. Whether that is just the peace in the present moment, or it is the bliss and the profundity, and you can attain through deep samadhi experiences. All of these are the inner refuge that every one of us should really be seeking for. Because when you seek for the inner refuge, we can let go of the world. The problems of the external world don't matter so much anymore, because you have an alternative place, the only place where you can find a real freedom from that uncertainty outside. And whereas the external world is it's something we share with 7 billion people on this planet, and everyone has a say in the shaping of that external world. We have any individual have almost no say whatsoever on the shape of the external world. Our inner world, that is where we have a say. We can do something about that, even though it doesn't happen immediately, even though it may take time to develop the mind. It is something that we actually can do. This is our private space. This is something we have some way of affecting in our life. So that's why the inner life is ultimately the refuge for us. And there is a very nice saying by Ajahn Chah being one of the greatest spiritual masters of the 20th century, certainly in Thailand. And of course, the teacher of Ajahn Brahmali being my teacher, his teacher again, linearly going back, and he talked about your real home. Where is your real home? And your real home is precisely in samadhi, in satipatthana practice, because you are released from the world outside, this greatly uncertain world outside. So this becomes a very interesting and I think very very, very useful reminder. It is especially a useful reminder in times like this. I don't know what you think about the world these days, but to me it seems like the world is kind of going very strange places, and yeah, all kind of weird stuff happens. Wars going on in places where you thought maybe never there will be war again. Of course, that was a mistake on our part to think that there's never going to be war. That was a kind of silly mistake. This idea that somehow all of these things are sorted out. Or things like climate change, yeah, seeming to be politicians don't seem to be able to deal with it. Should we have expected them to deal with it? Probably not. Yeah, they have all kind of pressures on them from various sides. All the refugees everywhere, more and more refugees around the world. You know, I mean, the COVID is kind of the least of our problem. That's kind of bad enough, but it's kind of still the least of our problems in this world. And then you have, so there's so things that seem to be going wrong, kind of, you know, great powers, saber rattling that I haven't done for a long time. And the more you realize that the world really is out of control, you know, the more you realize that the world is run by people just like us. Sometimes I remind myself that the people who run this world are just pretty much like me. Yeah, they probably aren't all that wise. Yeah, I think we see that all the time. But that kind of scares me because I don't know anything. And I think the people who run the world are a bit like me. I kind of find that really scary. Yeah, isn't that kind of scary? Because we're all kind of in the dark. We're all deluded. We don't know what actually is going on. And we're kind of trying, fumbling around. Yeah. And you think of these great leaders, and actually they aren't all that great sometimes. And all of these things, when you add it all up, what it means is that you should be so happy that you have a spiritual practice, you have a spiritual path, because this is the refuge from all of those things. In fact, the more you remember this whole problem of the world outside, it actually improves your spiritual practice, because it enables you to let go of that world which is so unreliable. This is the power of this. So rather than allowing this to make you depressed and sad that the world outside is going to the dogs, actually you don't want to give it to the dogs, poor dogs, they're going to have a hard time with that one. Yeah, the more you remember that, if you remember it in the right way, instead of making you depressed and sad, it makes you kind of move towards the spiritual path. It makes it easier to let go of the five senses of the body, because the five senses, that is the way through which we are involved with that world, the way in which we attach to that world. So it enables you to let go. So this is exactly what the Buddha is saying here. Yeah? He's saying that by letting go of that world, by remembering you cannot rely on the survival of the Buddha is going to pass away. And that is just here almost like a simile or a metaphor for the whole world. Yeah? The whole world is of the same nature as the Buddha's body. So then you have to go within instead and find that refuge within that. Such a beautiful idea, and it's so powerful when you see this and understand what is going on there. It is the only place ever you're going to find any real freedom from all of this suffering and problems around us. And one of the things that I am reminded of when I read this, and this is one of the things that I always found very interesting to reflect on. And this is the way I was taught meditation by Ajahn Brahmali. Yeah? Ajahn Brahmali is my teacher. And, you know, in the early days I put in a monastery, I would ask Ajahn Brahmali, how do you meditate? It doesn't work for me. What am I supposed to do? And Ajahn said, sit longer. Yeah? That kind of was his kind of most common advice, to sit longer and she'll be right. She'll be right. It's in the most straight way of saying that everything will work out. And so actually he never said that, but I kind of adding a bit for fun here. But so he says sit longer. He doesn't say she'll be right. He says sit longer. And so you try to sit longer. Still nothing happens. Yeah. And then his advice later on became more, you know, not to sit longer, but don't do anything in the meditation. Just allow everything to be, to stand back, no willpower, no doing. And if you just wait long enough and you don't do anything, everything will happen. Why? Because that's what Ajahn Brahmali does. He sits back and first of all, he leans back against the wall just to relax a little bit. Yeah? And after a while, when you feel your mindfulness is established, you can straighten up your body. mindfulness is strong, and you just don't do anything. And you wait, and as you wait, the mind becomes more and more peaceful. This nimitas, the bright lights of the mind, bang, they come up, and then bang, you go deeper into meditation, all the way into the most profound samadhi imaginable. That's how Ajahn Brahmali meditates. Don't need to watch the breath or anything. You just sit back, wait, and bang, you go into samadhi. Yes. Isn't that amazing? I thought that was just so amazing. I couldn't barely believe it, but actually, no, I've lived with him for almost 30 years. I know that's exactly how he does it. But of course, then he teaches this to others. And I've seen people becoming so frustrated. Yeah, I'm doing exactly what you do, Ajahn. Why doesn't it work? I have been frustrated too with it. And then, of course, you start to read the suttas and try to understand what is going on. Why does this work for one person but not for another? And one of the first things that I read, which was very fascinating, was a sutta we're going to have a look at later on, called the Chaitanya Sutta. And the Chaitanya Sutta explains the psychology of meditation, how your mind is supposed to develop as you practice meditation. In other words, the first-person experience, how you are supposed to experience meditation practice. Very interesting, right? Because that gives you a kind of a little signs on the path, what you're supposed to experience. It's very useful, of course. And in that sutta, lo and behold, what it says that you start off with sila. From sila comes non-remorse, and non-remorse comes pamuja, which means like joy. From pamuja comes piti, it's more joy. From piti comes passaddhi, tranquility, very peaceful state. Passaddhi comes sukha, happiness. From happiness comes samadhi, the stillness of the mind. From samadhi comes seeing things according to reality. And then all the way to full awakening. And what that sutta also says, it says that to move from one stage to the next one, as you go through this, it says that na caitanaya karaniya. I hope you have done your Pali homework. Now I'm going to translate it, I'm just messing around. So the na caitanaya karaniya means not to be done by willpower. It's literally what it means. Chaitanya is a will, it is intention. So these stages, moving from one to the next one, is not to be done by an act of will or by intention. And I thought this is exactly what Ajahn Brahmali is saying. You sit back, you allow the process to happen, you don't do it. And if it is not to be done by an act of will, the implication of that is that if you do will, you're going to get in the way of the process. It is a natural process that happens by itself, not to be done by an act of will. So the will actually gets in the way. So what Ajahn Brahmali was saying was exactly what the Buddha was saying. I always find that very, oops, dead. Rebirth, okay. Oh, is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think it's dead now. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Right. Look at that color. It's that color. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. So, okay. So this is kind of, it's always something I really like to see when you see that what your teacher says actually aligns with what the Buddha says. It's kind of nice, right? If it contradicts each other, it's a bit sort of, what's going on then? What should I need to change my teacher? This is kind of bad news. So it's really powerful when that happens. Everything kind of lines up nicely. And this is the idea for what I said before about using the suttas as your gold standard. Yeah, everything should be measured against the suttas. What the Buddha said has to be taken as true, otherwise it's kind of not really worthwhile, and that everything should really fall into line with it. So why then doesn't it work for people? What is the reason why Ajahn Brahm teaches where the Buddha seems to be agreeing with this? Why is it that other people can't do this? And this becomes this very interesting search, because once you can find the solution to these kind of things, then you can start to understand what you need to do for this process actually to work out. And the answer is, I think, actually quite simple. And the answer is that to be able to not do anything at all, doing, what does it arise from? Doing arises very much from craving. It arises from our attachment to the sensory world. Because as long as we are attached to the sensory world, as long as we are interested in that sensory world is only really interesting insofar as we crave for it. So if you enjoy the sights of the world, you enjoy the touches of the world, the sounds of the world, what you will do is that you will crave for those things. And the craving always is associated with the idea of doing it. Craving is always about the future. Craving is a place you want to go for the future. And the way to get there is by doing things in the middle so as to achieve those things. That is the nature of that world. That world is never really fully satisfactory in the present. It's always about a movement towards the objects of that sensory world. So the reason why people cannot stop doing is basically because of attachment to the sensory world, or an interest in that five sense world. As long as that interest is there, you're going to do it. And that's why you cannot follow these instructions by Ajahn Brahm. It's impossible. You need a preliminary stage. And that preliminary stage is to understand the downside of the five senses, the downside of the five sense world. And this is why I was saying before, actually, when we have so many problems in the world, when there's so many things going wrong around us, actually, it is a great opportunity to let go of that world a little bit. Why am I so interested in that world anyway? Well, it's basically the reason we're interested is because we are deluded about it. If you watch TV and you see the war in Ukraine, you say, oh no, I don't want war in Ukraine. What's going on? What's going to happen next? Is it going to spill across the borders? I'm going to Poland after Belgium, and Poland has a common border with Ukraine, so maybe the war will spill into Poland. Is that possible, Piotr? We don't know, right? It's impossible to say. The world is just so uncertain. We don't know. We think, no, it's not really possible. But of course it's possible. Anything is possible. It must spill into Norway, for goodness sake. I'm going to Norway afterwards. That's kind of really bad. It's going to be moving around like that. And of course, these things are just inherently uncertain. We don't know what is going to happen next. And if you understand the Buddha's teaching about uncertainty, unreliability, impermanence, actually you know that there's all these forces under the surface, always working to undermine the status quo. Always there. And once those forces kind of come together, and they kind of reach a critical point, then bam, impermanence happens. It's like an earthquake. When you have an earthquake, you have all of these kind of movements happening under the surface, tensions building up, and the tensions build up and up and up. And you can't see that happening because it's happening deep down under the, deep down in the surface, in the Earth's crust or whatever it is. And it builds up and builds up and builds up until one day the forces are so strong, the tension is so strong that it needs to be released. And bang, you have the earthquake. It happens usually without any kind of forewarning. That is a nice simile for the way things work in all our existence. Forces building up under the surface. We can't really see them. And then suddenly one day, the forces are so strong that everything just goes crashing bang, and impermanence happens big time. So remember that. Remember, we don't know. We think that we always misunderstand the world. We think the world is far more permanent than it actually is. Yeah, because why? Because this is our bias. We want things to be permanent. We don't want impermanence, because impermanence means that it's unreliable. It's like wanting an unreliable friend. Who wants an unreliable friend? Nobody wants an unreliable friend, right? That's what friendship is about. It's about a degree of reliability. Otherwise, it's worthless. And because we desire reliability in the world, we see permanence, or at least less impermanence than actually is the case. We are biased in the way that we look at the world. So remember that bias. And when you remember that bias, you're able to see the world more clearly. Unreliable, uncertain. There's no refuge there. There's always like a low-level earthquake here going on. You can never take a stand anywhere. The moment you stand on something, you stand on this cushion over here, you stand on the carpet, nature comes, pulls out the carpet. And when the carpet is pulled out, you fall over because you're taking a stand on it. Taking a stand on the carpet, that was the problem in the first place. Taking a stand means attaching, thinking that the ground is going to be reliable, but actually it is always going to be unreliable. So very powerful. And so this is where we then find a refuge, and we need to learn to let go a little bit more of that world outside. And this kind of starts to also make a very good point about why the monastic life is so important in Buddhism. Yeah, why the Buddha instituted monasticism in the first place. And very often in the modern world, you hear people, yeah, the monasticism is some kind of ancient tradition. Yeah, we don't need to follow that. Modern world, don't need the monastics. People say sometimes, oh, they're right. Actually, I think they are really seriously mistaken. And it is not because it is wrong to practice as a layperson, it's perfectly fine. But the reason is that monasticism comes closer to the ideal of rejecting that world, which is so unsatisfactory. You can live like that in lay life as well, but it's more difficult. It is not as obvious how you will do it. And monasticism gives you a closer approximation how to live that life more fully. That is why it is very valuable. Yeah, the monastic life where you live a celibate life, you live a life where you have no entertainment and these kind of things, or at least much less of it. Yeah, all of that means that you are approximating to that life where you let go of the external world. And this is where you find your refuge. And this is one of the reasons why it is a very powerful way of living. If you live it well, that is. You have to live it well, of course, otherwise it doesn't really work. Okay. So this is what the Buddha says. Yeah, be an island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Teaching the your island, refuge, own refuge. How do you do this? By observing an aspect of the body. And this is a nice translation for kaya nupassi, one of these traditionally quite difficult and uncertain phrases to translate. People translate this phrase very differently, depending on who you ask. Keen, aware, and mindful. These words, keen is atapi, just means that keen is actually quite a nice translation. It means that you have energy, and a bit of effort you put into this. Keen is like a mixture of energy and effort, is how I understand this term. Aware, this is sampajano, this idea of sampajanya or a clear awareness. Here is translated differently. Before translated as situational awareness, here as aware. And then mindful, of course. So if you're going to do satipatthana, you have to be mindful as you do the practice. This is why foundations of mindfulness is the wrong translation for satipatthana. Foundation of mindfulness gives the sense that you do satipatthana to get mindful. No, it is actually about using mindfulness in the right way. That's really what it is about. Okay. So, and then it says, rid of desire and aversion for the world, right? And this is then one of these, again, important points. Rid of desire and aversion for the world is exactly what this is about, why this is so important. The world here is a reference to the five sense world, loka. And this is how this word is used very commonly in the suttas. Yeah, loka is the five sense world. It can be more than that, but this is a very common usage. You have the idea in the suttas of lokanta, yeah, which literally means the end of the world. Where is the end of the world? The end of the world is in samadhi, when you kind of let go of the whole world of the five senses. The easy way to go to the end of the world is to go to the lokanta vihara. That is the monastery at the end of the world. And this is where paṭicca-samuppāda lives, the monastery at the end of the world. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean, whether it means that they're practicing jhana all the time or what it means, but I think it has many different meanings. But the real lokanta in the sutras is where the five senses come to an end, yeah, in the jhana states, in the samadhi states. So you have no desire or aversion for that world. That's precisely why this is the refuge from that world, these satipatthanas. What are the satipatthana practices? I think many people are confused about what it actually means, what you're actually supposed to do. And the very simple answer in the sutras is that satipatthana practice is just mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, this kind of makes it very simple to practice. It's not complicated. You don't have to do a variety of things, watching the feet, the sensations of the body, watching the mind states, or whatever it is. All you have to do is watch the breath. Watching the breath fulfills all the four satipatthanas. Breath meditation is not some kind of preliminary practice that you do first, and you move on to the more important and profound practice of watching the sensations in the body. Not really. It is actually breath meditation is very profound in its own right. So this is what this is about. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. It's actually very interesting, this particular passage, but we don't have time for that, so I'm just going to skip it for now. And if you want to ask about it, you can always ask in the questions if you wish. So you meditate observing an aspect of the body, and you meditate observing an aspect of feelings, yeah, and then of mind, and then principles or maybe phenomena, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. That is how a mendicant is their own island, their own refuge with no other refuge. That is how the teaching is their island and their refuge with no other refuge. And this is the practice that takes you all the way to samadhi. Samadhi is kind of included there at the very end of satipatthana practice. So it's good stuff, isn't it? I really enjoy this stuff. It's really kind of cool. I don't know. When I read these suttas and the kind of the spiritual practice of Buddhism, it's just so meaningful and it's so believable. It is so true to to what we do to our lives, to things you can experience. There's something very real about these things, and it kind of makes sense. Yeah, it really makes sense. And yet it goes in the exact opposite direction of almost everyone else in the world does. So it's really, it's kind of extraordinary and wonderful and marvelous and everything else. So then the Buddha goes on. So we'll leave that behind now. We're going to move on. And the Buddha says, whether now or after I have passed, any who shall live as their own island, their own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teaching as their island and their refuge, with no other refuge. Those mendicants of mind who want to train shall be among the best of the best. Okay. Sounds good. So if you want to become the best of the best, just train yourself accordingly and you are in business, as they say. So there you are. So whether now or after I passed away, even while the Buddha is alive, you should be independent. You should not attach too much to the Buddha. And of course, that is exactly what people do. Venerable Ananda included. That's why they were kind of grieving and had it very difficult at this time. So the Buddha's kind of just guided them gently. So this is the first aspect really that I wanted to focus on in this Satipatthana Sutra, the idea finding refuge in the right place. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, and this is really also what I actually wanted to get to, because this is about what Buddhism really is about, what the Dhamma is, and what it is that we're taking refuge in. So let's carry on with that and see what that gets us. So the Buddha is a little bit further on in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the greatest sutta on the Buddha's passing away. There's kind of, I'm skipping a large section, and then this bit comes. So the Buddha went with Ananda to the hall with the peaked roof and said to him, "Go, Ananda, gather all the mendicants staying in the vicinity of Vesali together in the assembly hall." "Yes, sir," replied Ananda. He did what the Buddha asked, went up to him, bowed, stood to one side, and said to him, "Sir, the mendicant Sangha has assembled. Please, sir, go at your convenience." So this is kind of interesting. This is quite unusual. The Buddha sort of decides he's going to give the talk, and he kind of gets all the monks gathered together. Yeah. So this must surely be important, right? Otherwise he would do this. Go and get all the monks, all the monastics, or whatever it is, in the vicinity of Vesali, bring them together into the hall, the assembly hall, Bhaktana Sala. So it's kind of exciting, setting the scene for some really special things. Then the Buddha went to the assembly hall, where he sat down on the seat spread out and addressed the mendicants. "So mendicants, having carefully memorized those things I have taught you from my direct knowledge, you should cultivate, develop, and make much of them so that this spiritual practice may last for a long time." Yeah, so you should carefully memorize those things that I have taught from my direct knowledge. And so the point here, of course, is that whatever the Buddha teaches is from his direct knowledge, yeah? Or at the very least, those are the things that matter, those are the things to be memorized. This is one of the things that is kind of a standout about the Buddha's teaching, is that it all comes from insight, from understanding, from a realization of how the world actually works. This is very important because the world normally isn't like that. The majority of spiritual teachings in the world, the majority of philosophies in the world, the majority of ideas in the world, they have been kind of figured out by logic or by intuition. Yeah, this is the way it is, this is the way I think it should be. Bang, this is my teaching, take it or leave it. This is kind of how it often works. Have faith in this, and then you will go to God and be happy forever after, whatever it is. But Buddhism isn't really like that. And this is why often you will hear that Buddhism has claims that are religious in nature. But religious, it means like philosophical, what they call metaphysical. Metaphysical means something that has been thought up, like speculation about reality. Yeah? But actually, Buddhism doesn't have speculative ideas in it. When the Buddha says that there is rebirth, he doesn't say that as philosophical speculation. He says that because of insight, because of understanding. Yeah? And everything that you find in the suttas is actually comes from that same place. It comes from insight into things. And so this makes the suttas actually quite unique. Yeah, it makes them very different from anything else. It is not really a philosophy. A philosophy, by definition, is something that has been thought up. It's like a castle in the air. You have certain axioms and assumptions, and you build up this beautiful palace of philosophical thought. Well, Buddhism is like that. It's not a palace of philosophical thought at all. It is based on down-to-earth experience of the nature of reality. This is so different, yeah, from everything else we used in the world. This is one of those beautiful aspects of the Buddha's teachings, and what makes it really kind of unique in the human thought and human endeavor on the spiritual practices wherever you go. So this is, so he teaches from his direct knowledge. In fact, he probably had more direct knowledge than he actually teaches, because his teaching, he says elsewhere that he only teaches part of what he has understood. Many things he does not teach. Why does he not teach it? Well, precisely because it's not really useful. It is perhaps more philosophical in nature or whatever. And he doesn't teach those things. Why? Because actually they're not helpful. Now, I've asked people, if the Buddha knew all of these things, there's kind of this nice sutta where the Buddha says, I have knowledge of all of these things, but what I have taught you, he takes up the famous leaves in the Gosinga Grove, and he says, well, these leaves in my hand, well, this is like what I've taught you, and all the leaves overhead, and the trees overhead, and that's what I know, And he says, well, what is more, leaves in my hand or the leaves overhead? And the monks, they duly comply and say, the leaves in the hand are less, and the trees overhead is more. And it's kind of very sweet, the whole thing. And so then I ask people, I say, well, wouldn't it be interesting to know about all those leaves overhead? Imagine the Buddha knew all of these things. Wouldn't that be like, that would be really cool to know, right? Well, I wish I knew all those things. That's probably about how the universe works, the connection between mind and body, the way kind of everything works out. And that's the problem. It is so interesting. That's exactly the problem, You look at, and I know my own defilements, I'm often interested in kind of slightly philosophical questions, interested in reading articles about maybe the latest scientific research, not that I really understand these things, but it's kind of cool anyway. A little bit about cosmology and about all of these things. And it's interesting, it draws you in, and we're all drawn to philosophize. And I think the Buddha's idea is I will teach you the absolute minimum so that you don't start philosophizing too much. I'll give you the minimum noble eightfold path back. That's it. Don't get more than that. And he's right. He's so right about it, because as soon as the Buddha passed away, what do the monastics start to do? They start to philosophize straight away. And this is where you get the Abhidhamma from. The Abhidhamma is basically a work of philosophy. It's about filling in all the gaps. It's about kind of making this whole system about how the world works. All the different mind moments, all the different states of matter, how it all interacts according to the various conditions. The Patana, the last book of the Abhidhamma, is a book that shows the conditionality between all possible states of mind and matter in all possible ways. And the Patana has been abbreviated. Those are ellipsis points. The ellipsis point, dot, right? Lots of dots. If there were no dots in that book at all, it was complete without dots. How long would it be? And they say the spine of the book would be roughly 1,000 kilometers long. That's just the spine of the book, Imagine the actual text, The spine of the book, they say, so would reach roughly between Melbourne and Sydney in Australia. It's about 1,000 kilometers. So that's kind of philosophy for you, And this kind of the beautiful symbolism here is that it's endless, That's kind of the nice thing about it. And so the Buddha warns us about that. Philosophy is not the way to go, and it's so easy to be attracted by it. That's why you need to kind of focus on the essentials. So what are these essentials that the Buddha did discover by his direct knowledge? Before I go to that, let's just see what he says here. He says that you should cultivate, develop, make much of these things so that the spiritual practice may last for a long time. And the idea here is that it's not enough to memorize the teachings, but only where the teachings are going to live is if we cultivate them. It is up to each one of us to ensure that these teachings actually continue on into the future. If we practice in the right way, I guess the monastic community has a special responsibility perhaps in this, then that is how we kind of allow these things to continue on into the future. It's great to have the suttas as such, but the suttas really only come alive for practice, as I was saying before. We need both. And these two pillars in Buddhism are what makes the Buddhist teaching so powerful. The suttas, the original teaching of the Buddha on the one hand, and then the current practice of those teachings and the realization of those teachings in the current day. Those two things together, seeing the example of these teachings lived fully together with those powerful teachings, is what makes this so powerful. If you don't have those ancient teachings, in a sense, you don't have the kind of you're missing that thing which gives legitimacy to people in the present day. Yeah, if I didn't have the Buddhist teaching and I went out into the street in Belgium, I went out to some funny road and shaved my head and said, please follow what I say, people would say, get lost. Yeah, that's what they would say. They would say, get out of here. You know, what do you mean? But because it happens to be an ancient tradition, people see me and say, oh, please, can I offer you something? That's the difference, right? It's a massive difference. Once you have that tradition behind you, it makes the whole thing work in a very powerful way. It makes it believable. It gives it integrity. It means that all of us here, whether we are lay people, whether we are monastics, whether we are women or men, we all, in a sense, respect the same root teacher, the Buddha. That means that we are equal in a certain way. But if you have a religion where kind of some guru goes on and say, yeah, I discovered everything, follow me, then there's an inequality there, which is very dangerous. Where it's much more likely that you will have abuse and all kind of negative things happening in that kind of community. But when we're all kind of looking to the Buddha as the root teacher, we're all on an equal level. You can argue with me, you can tell me where I go wrong. But what you're saying is nonsense. This is the real understanding of this. You can say that to me, and if you're right, well, I will have to kind of accept it. So, and this is, I think, a very positive thing. And then you need to have the living example. The living example is what kind of makes these teachings come alive. And it's such an important thing to see people in the present day practicing these things all the way to the end. See those qualities there. Those two pillars of Buddhism is what makes the Buddhist teaching exceptional. You find one of those in many different spiritual practices, but it's rare that you find those two things coming together. So this is what we need to do. And so what are, and then it says that would be for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. If we want to live for the benefit and happiness of the gods and humans, this is what we should do. And what are those things that I have taught from my direct knowledge? So if you haven't read this already, hopefully if you have, this is kind of really exciting, isn't it? What might they be? What are these things that the Buddha has taught from direct knowledge? And they are the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 sutta-retreats, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of psychic power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 awakening factors, and the noble Eightfold Path. So these are those things. These are known collectively as the 37 Bodhipakkya Dhammas, the 37 aids to awakening. They are grouped together in the suttas in many places. And when the Buddha talks about what he has taught, these are his teachings. This is the essence of what the Buddha taught through his 45 years as a teacher. So that's this is very important. And it means that when you read the suttas, or those suttas that actually matter, maybe there are some suttas that don't matter so much, those suttas that really are the core of the Buddha's teachings, they fall into this category of these 37 Bodhipakkya Dhammas. So what are they? What does this actually mean? And one of the kind of most interesting things about these 37 is that they are very practical things. When you look at them, all of these things are things how we practice, how we live our lives, what we are supposed to do. Again, there's no real philosophy there. There's hardly any theory at all. It's all just practical. It's what we how you're supposed to think and perceive and live and meditate and all these kind of things. It's a very practical and pragmatic path. But is it just practical and pragmatic? Well, actually, no. There is, if you know what these things actually look like, you will realize that there are certain theoretical elements as well. And the reason that we need a little bit of theory is because if you're going to practice a path, you have to somehow situate that path into some sort of reality. why should I even bother practicing this path? Yeah, you have to have some kind of theoretical framework for the path. And that theoretical framework is actually found there. So if you, for example, you go to the Noble Eightfold Path, yeah, the first part of that path, number one, is right view. And of course, right view is a way to describe the world. So you can say that that's kind of theory in a way. But it's not just theory, because it's also something that we need to strive ourselves to achieve, so that we can see the world in the way the Buddha saw it. So there is a theoretical framework in there. It's not just theory. And that's good news for us, because we're going to have to look at dependent origination later on. Yeah, so if there was no theory, we'd be in serious trouble, and we probably shouldn't be doing that dependent origination at all. But dependent origination is also part of this. How is it part of this? Well, if you know that the Four Noble Truths are part of right view, the second noble truth, the second noble truth is actually dependent origination. The second noble dependent origination is an alternative way of phrasing the second noble truth. Yeah, so it's actually, in that sense, it is a core part of this teaching. In that sense, it may seem like I really have to look deep to find it in there, but you go to the Noble Path, you go to the first fact, first right, within that you have four, you go to the second one, and within the second one you find dependent origination. But because these are, very principal teachings of the Buddha, actually I think it is not as deep as it may look to find this. So it is there, and for this reason, I think we are on the right track to think about this, because it is then about the right outlook, how to understand life, and then part of that dependent origination we will also see is also many practical aspects of how to actually practice this path in the right way. So it is there, but basically it is very heavily biased towards mere practice, what it is that we have to do, these 37 paṭicca-dhammas. Another interesting thing about these 37 paṭicca-dhammas is that if you can actually contract them, and they are essentially the same as the Noble Eightfold Path. 37 actually contracts into 8 if you know how to see them properly. So I'll just show you how that works. So we have the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, 4 satipatthanas, that slots straight into the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. It is equivalent to the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. The 4 right efforts, well, that slots right into the 6th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is about the right efforts. The 4 bases of psychic power, I would say the 4 bases of spiritual power, I think it's better. It's not just about psychic things, it's about general spiritual power. That is mostly about samadhi, how to achieve samadhi. It is a little bit about all the last 3 factors, but mainly about samadhi at the very end there. The 5 faculties and the 5 powers, well, they are the viewpoint that is seeing the Noble Eightfold Path from the viewpoint of the noble people, the noble ones. That is how they see the Noble Eightfold Path. So again, it's just a particular way of looking at the Noble Eightfold Path when you reach a degree of awakening. Then you have the 7 factors of awakening. Well, that is an expansion of the last 2 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. 7 factors of awakening start with sati-samuppāda, the factor of awakening that is mindfulness. It ends up with the paṭicca-samuppāda, the factor of awakening of equanimity. And this is just an expansion of the last 2 factors. So in a sense, all of these things, they kind of go into the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path really then is sufficient for the whole practice. And this is just like an expansion in a sense, various angles from which to view this Noble Eightfold Path. So that's kind of the weird thing about Buddhism. You can kind of zoom in onto tiny bits and pieces, you can kind of contract it all, and you can expand it out, and you can see it from different angles. But actually, it is really, in one way, it's a very simple, even though it seems so complicated, it's actually a very simple thing. One of the things I always marvel at is that the Buddha, on his night of awakening, is like one flash of insight. It's like bang. And then from that flash of insight emerged 10,000 pages of the Paṭicca. Is that kind of extraordinary? That's exactly what happened. Right? You see this one thing, and then you're actually trying to explain what happened, how it works, how to get there, what that is. It's actually quite hard to articulate this. And this is what the Buddha does then in the 10,000 pages of the Paṭicca. So it really all goes back to that one flash of insight. So that is another thing which comes out of this. Another interesting thing that you can do if you have the time to spare, and as monks, this is kind of what we do, this is kind of a professional pursuit. Maybe that's not sure, but maybe they do. And so if you take and you make a table of all of these things, what you find, you can find what are the common factors throughout, what are the most important factors of this. And what you find is that the three things that kind of you find again and again in this 37, that is effort, mindfulness, and samadhi. So in a sense, this is what it comes down to almost. This is the most important part of the Buddhist path. And effort, mindfulness, and samadhi is all about mental development, mental cultivation. It is what we're trying to do here. And this is kind of the core of the Dhamma, is the idea of mental cultivation. So, so those are the 37 Bodhipakkha Dhammas. This is what the Buddha has taught. And this is what we should take as his teachings. And when we read the suttas, this is largely what it will actually come down to. This is what they really are about. Very useful as a kind of, to stand back a little bit and to be able to understand how the Dhamma actually works. So let me just finish off this sutta before time is up again, because otherwise we'll never get anywhere with this sutta. So the Buddha then says, these are the things I have taught from my direct knowledge. Having carefully memorized them, you should cultivate, develop, and make much of them, that the spiritual practice may last for a long time. That would be for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. Then the Buddha said to the mendicants, come now, mendicants, I say to you all, conditions fall apart. Persist with diligence. The final extinguishment of the realized one will be soon. 3 months from now, the realized one will finally be extinguished. So here the Buddha is basically telling all his disciples that his life is coming to an end. And of course, the saying that you see here, conditions fall apart, persist with diligence, these are exactly the same thing as the last words of the Buddha on his deathbed. When the Buddha is lying between the famous twin sal trees, waiting to die at the very end, this is exactly what he says. These are literally the last words of the Buddha, according to the sutta. Vaya Dhamma Sankara Appamadena Sampadeta is the Pali. I'm not entirely satisfied with Bhattacharya's translation. I would say all things have come to an end. All things fall apart. All things come to an end. Practice on with not so much with diligence, but with carefulness or with heedfulness. That is really what this really comes down to. That is the last teaching of the Buddha. And that is because it is the last teaching of the Buddha, and it is also here, mentioned here again. It means that it is extraordinarily important. In a way, we can say that this last teaching is a summary of the entire Buddhist path. All things are impermanent, all things vaya, all things come to an end. Well, this is a summary of the idea of impermanence. And impermanence really is kind of at the core of understanding dukkha, suffering, understanding non-self. If we fully understand impermanence, we understand really the nature of reality. We understand the nature, first of all, most importantly, of the external world around us. That is hard enough, but that is enough to get you to the stillness of samadhi, the kind of the end of the Noble Eightfold Path itself. And beyond that, it takes you to the impermanence of all phenomena, even beyond that, even the phenomena of the mind. So this is a summary of the Dhamma. Yeah? So even sometimes we need little things to hold on to in the Buddhist world, little things to remember as you go through your daily life, and you can kind of keep at the back of your mind. It can remind you of what actually matters. And this is one of these great little things, little sayings, vaya Dhamma Sankara, all phenomena, everything in the world, everything anywhere has an end. Yeah? It will be dissolved eventually. Appamadena means being heedful, being careful, being diligent is a little bit too much on working hard. But this idea of being circumspect and careful is a very important part of it. And sampadena is to practice, or to carry on, or to make an effort, or even to have success down the track as a consequence. So you have the teaching, the outlook, the right view. Yeah, everything must fall apart. And then from that right view comes the practice, carry on with carefulness. In other words, be careful. Impermanence and being careful. Impermanence, being circumspect, practice in the right way. So I will stop there. It is 3 minutes past 7. It's a good time to stop. So let's have a short break before we move together. Yeah. So let's have how long should the break be? 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah. So we'll be back to quarter past 7.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll have a 10-minute break. We'll see if I can just have a chance to stretch your legs a bit and use the toilet if you wish. And then we'll come back at quarter past 7. Is that all the questions?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good. Yes.
Just for everybody on Zoom, I don't know if you can see me, but there is something in the chat box where you can also link to a spreadsheet where you can also post some questions. Is it something that you can quickly look down, or is it very long? How can you do that? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so I hope you're ready for more, because it's before. You want to have done this is kind of forced that Dhamma, not like the shut down the throat, as I say. So it's always, you're very welcome not to come for any of the sessions if you don't want to. There's nothing compulsory again. I don't know if Anne-Marie or Vimala said this at the beginning, there's only two compulsory things, right? Two compulsory things on this retreat. So those two coming out, breakfast and lunch, everything else is voluntary. It's something I learned from Ajahn Brahmali a long time ago. So, okay, so here we go. The first question is a very important question. I will talk about this later on. And I will probably give an answer now as well, just to get us started on this theme, very important theme of the Dhamma. How do we differentiate effort and willpower? Yeah, this is a very, I think, very kind of important point in the Dhamma. And there's a number of different answers to this, and the answer really depends on which part of the path you are as well. So, for example, if we're talking about meditation practice, very often you want to use minimum effort and minimum willpower. Both should really be minimized, because the idea is just to hang out with the breath, just to enjoy it to the maximum, and just allow the meditation to deepen on its own. That's kind of the ideal way of practicing meditation. Of course, the ideal way is never no such thing as ideal way, of course, so the reality is a bit different. Sometimes you may have to use a little bit of effort in your meditation, to guide the mind in the right direction, sometimes to overcome maybe certain defilements that arise, etc. But ideally, once your mindfulness is well established and you have the right attitude, an attitude of goodwill towards yourself and the world, feeling kind of have a good feeling about everything, then the meditation usually just kind of happens. And all you have to do is sit back and enjoy the ride. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? This is kind of such an attractive thing. You sit back and you just enjoy the peace, the bliss, the happiness that's arising in your mind. There's something extraordinarily attractive about that. No effort, nothing needs to be done. All you have to do is just kind of hang out and enjoy all of these things. So I thought, it sounds like a dream come true, doesn't it? It's just, so it's really, so anyway, that's kind of effort in meditation, or the lack of effort in meditation, if you like. But what about the rest of life, when we're not meditating in ordinary life? What do we really need to do? What is effort and willpower there? Now, effort always implies a degree of willpower, right? There's always a certain degree of willpower and effort. So willpower can never really be completely eliminated. Some degree of willpower is required. But the question is, how do we kind of apply that willpower in a way that it doesn't kind of become silly, that we don't kind of suppress things or repress things and kind of turn our mind into some kind of terrible place where everything is repressed and suppressed. Because this can be quite common in the Buddhist path. We don't really want to see what is there, and so we sort of push things to one side. And of course, that can then cause very serious troubles later on, even mental problems, if there's too much repression and suppression in our practice. So the ideal way of practicing, instead of using willpower, is to use wisdom instead. And some of the suttas I will look at later on shows you how the Buddha actually taught this from the very beginning, how the Buddha actually practiced using wisdom rather than willpower from the very start. And using wisdom means that you learn to look at things in a different way. What are the things that we're trying to do on the Buddhist path? Well, we're trying to overcome defilements. We're all trying to overcome the negative tendencies of the mind. And of course, these defilements are very often one of the main defilements that are really problematic is obviously anger and ill will. This is a really big problem. It's obviously a big problem. It makes the mind very agitated. It causes all kinds of problems in our relationship with other people and the world around us. sometimes it causes wars in the world. Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very big problem, certainly a big problem for the spiritual path. And so the way to overcome anger, the normal way we do that, it's not acceptable usually in society to show too much anger. You can't go around being angry all the time, yeah? People will shun you after a while if you're angry all the time. It's what it's like. No one likes people who are angry. And we accept that people get angry occasionally, but not all the time. And so if we get angry too much, we tend to suppress it. We push it down inside of us. Okay, this is the wrong time. And we kind of just grit our teeth and we kind of carry on. And we smile, kind of slightly dodgy smile and through the anger and everything. And we kind of carry on like that. And this is kind of the standard way of dealing with emotions that we don't like. We tend to just kind of push them aside in this way. And so it actually is quite different. And it's quite difficult to change that attitude and deal with emotions in a different way. Because the right way of dealing with these emotions like anger is actually think differently about things. To learn to perceive situations in a new way. This is really what it is about. And if you do that, you actually avoid this whole problem of having to suppress things. And it's a far more powerful way of dealing with problems. It is more powerful because when you see things in the right way, when you turn your mind in the right direction, the problem tends to disappear. And sometimes it's astonishing, it can disappear just like that. Yeah. This is the power of wisdom. Willpower is actually very weak because willpower is like holding the lid on a boiling kettle. Have you ever tried to hold the lid on a boiling kettle? Willpower, yeah, and eventually the whole thing kind of blows up anyway. It can't be done. And that is kind of a bit what kind of suppressing anger is like. And then when you relax your effort a little bit, it all comes out. The anger is actually, there's a simile for anger in the suttas. The simile is actually boiling water. Yeah, it's a very similar kind of thing. You try to hold it in, and as soon as you relax, bang, it comes out with a vengeance. And it's much worse than it would otherwise have been. So we use wisdom power to do this. And I'm going to talk about this in much more detail later on. But essentially, the idea is that you have to look at people. People are the main source of anger in the world. Yeah, people are really problematic. Is that right? People are the greatest source of joy and also the greatest source of problems. Right? It's kind of just the way things seem to be. Then. So it is really hard. So what we have to do, we have to learn to see people in a new way. And when you see people in a new way, when you know how to look at people, actually anger just disappears as a consequence. Ill will just goes out the window, which is very kind of useful. So that is what it all is all about. I'm going to talk about this at length later on how to do that. But basically the idea is that we need to stop seeing people as autonomous agents who are irritating us and making us angry because they want to kind of torture us with their stupid actions and things. That is the wrong way to look at people. If you look at people in this way, and it's kind of this me against them or them against me, then it's going to be almost going to be problematic. But instead, we should need to see people as more like as robots, people who are trapped. They are trapped in their habits, trapped in the ways of being. And once you understand that people are trapped, one of my favorite sayings is to say that people are trapped by their personality. Yeah, you cannot choose your personality. The person you are now is basically all the causes and conditions coming together in the present, and you are that person. You can't do much about that. You are trapped in that personality. And once you understand that people are trapped, and the reason they behave the way they do is because they are trapped, then you can have compassion instead of anger. And it's kind of extraordinary because what it means is that a small change in perception, a small movement of the mind, is a different way of looking at things. And that difference in looking at things can happen in a fraction of a second. You turn it around, and instead of getting angry, you have compassion for the person instead. It's extraordinarily powerful. And that thing can never really work through willpower. It only works through wisdom power. Yeah? You have to be wise about this. In fact, it is so obvious that this is the right way of looking at things. That is a miracle that the whole world doesn't teach this already. Why doesn't the whole world teach this? Well, the main reason is because most of the world has the idea of a sense of self. And And as long as you have an idea of a sense of self, then that sense of self gets in the way of seeing people as entirely conditioned. This is the problem. So this is why the Buddhist teaching, it actually opens up that way of seeing people in a new way. So here you can see the idea of non-self in action, what it actually means in a very practical way, how to use it in a very practical way. When there is no self, people are not really responsible for all the silly things they do. Don't say bad things or stupid things, it's silly things, because we're just blind, we're just silly. And this is the problem. So this is how you use wisdom power rather than willpower. I think it's Ajahn Brahmali coined the term wisdom power in one of his books. Everything I say comes from Ajahn Brahmali. I say nothing original. It's just all kind of regurgitating what has been spoken before. There's nothing new under the sun, as they say, and that's true. We are really just regurgitating things. And it's kind of nice. It's kind of non-self-again. You stop taking kind of so much credit for the things that come out of your mouth, which is kind of actually quite nice. And so that is one way of doing this. Another way of using, not using too much willpower, using wisdom, has to do with the realm of the five senses. I just talked at length before about the importance of seeing the world in the right way. That seeing the world in the right way is what enables meditation practice, because we need to somehow loosen our attachment and grip on the world of the five senses. The way to do that is to see the world in the right way. That's why I said that when there is all these problems in the world, there's actually a golden opportunity to see the world in the right way. When everything is going well, like it did maybe, 20 years ago or whatever, when things there was apparently no problems in the world. The Berlin Wall was coming down, Germany was kind of getting reunified, and the Americans were triumphalists. The world has understood that this is the right way. We have won the end of history, this kind of stuff. Of course, it turned out to be completely wrong, and we could have predicted that as Buddhists a long time ago. But so that's why often when life goes really well, you become complacent and you become stupid as a consequence of things going well. So never be too happy when things go well. Feel a bit depressed when things go well. Because well is scary. Well is when things are, you start becoming stupid. But when the things go badly, that is your chance for wisdom. That is your opportunity to look at things in an entirely new way. Good, bad, who knows? Famous story about that again from that famous teacher Ajahn Brahmali. Good, bad, who knows? It's such a beautiful story because we don't really know what is good for us, what is bad for us. They're so uncertain. It depends entirely on how we deal with it, whether it's good or bad for us. So we use these things in the right way. It actually becomes powerful. Use it with wisdom power, then it becomes useful. Anyway, I'm going to talk much more about this later on because this is a very interesting and important part of Buddhist practice, how to develop the mind. But for now, I will put it to one side. One side. Okay. So, next question. I notice Sila and the role of Sila gets seldom mentioned in Dependent Liberation book. Why is that? Really? Okay, gee, is that you are talking about the booklet that I have kind of is based on or something I said once. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I have to change the book and add a few pages on Sila at the beginning because I have not done my job properly. That is, Sila is very important. I mean, it's hard to overstate the importance of Sila. Sila is the foundation of everything in Buddhism. And if you want to have success in a meditation, if your meditation isn't going forward, if something is not happening that should be happening, there's two possibilities. Either the problem is Sila or the problem is wrong view. Those are the two areas where things tend to go wrong. So Sila is kind of it's really so important. If you look at the Noble Eightfold Path, it starts off with right view, then you have right intention. And the next four factors are really all about Sila after that. All about how to live in the right way, how to think in the right way, all of these kind of things. It is so fundamental for things to get right, to go right. And I spoke before, I mentioned about the idea of refuge being the four satipatthānas. I mentioned the idea of Ajahn Brahmali saying that all you have to do is sit back and allow these things to happen. And I was wondering, what does it mean by this? Yeah? And one of the points I was making was that Advanced don't do anything. And why is it that people are not able to not do anything? And the reason is because we are attached to the world of five senses. We cannot, actually, we're not able not to do anything. The mind is always either holding on and getting involved with those things or actively thinking about those things. So we cannot let go. That's why the mind doesn't become peaceful. That's why it stops. That's why it plateaus at a certain point. It doesn't go any deeper because of those attachments. So this is one thing, but the other side of the thing that you realize when you read the suttas is the incredible importance of sila. If you have a look at the Satipatthana Samyutta are the connected discourses on Satipatthana practice, which basically is what we're talking about now, the idea of meditation, watching the breath, and the Manasati, all of these things. It says that Satipatthana is founded based on two things. Those two things are sila and ujjuka-ditti. Ujjuka-ditti is basically right view. Right view and sila. Well, right view is that the understanding of where to look for happiness, not in the world, but actually on the spiritual path. Yeah? That is a very important aspect of the idea of right view. And the sila is that the other factor. Yeah? And that is really where so much of the effort is to be put. And in fact, it is so important that if you understand the importance of sila, of morality, of kindness, whatever you want to call it, if you understand it fully, it will be in the back of your mind all the time. It will guide all your actions, yeah, moment to moment in your daily life. So this is why it is so important to get that brainwash, where you know that this is so utterly significant for the path to work. The more clearly you know that, the more powerful is going to be your mindfulness during daily life to alert you to what is going on. It is not just mindfulness as such. It is not just being aware of what you're doing in daily life, but it's being aware together with the instructions for what you're supposed to do with that awareness. The purpose of that awareness is to guide you to be kind. That's basically the purpose. One of the, I think, greatest misunderstandings of maybe so much of modern meditation is the idea that we are supposed to just be aware in daily life. And this comes from, in part, the Satipatthana Sutta, which talks about the idea of awareness in daily activities. Yeah, when you go forward, go one way, you are aware. When you go back, you're aware when stretching and pulling back your limbs, you are aware when eating, etc. But all of these daily activities, you're supposed to be aware. But the idea is that we're supposed to be mindful during daily activities. And the instructions stop there, just be mindful. But actually, that's not really what it is about. The idea, and there's some very good reasons for thinking this, but the purpose of awareness in daily activities is to help us to be more kind in your speech, in your actions, in your thoughts, in your perceptions, in everything, absolutely everything. That is the purpose. And instead of translating sila as morality, as is very common in the world, we should translate sila as kindness. Sila is about our entire personality. It's about our habits. It's about our conduct in general, in the broadest possible sense. It is such a broad thing, and calling it morality, reducing it to this tiny little area, okay, don't be bad. Yeah, that's kind of what morality means, don't be bad, but there's actually so much more to it. And so the idea is to transform yourself. And if you're going to be able to transform yourself fully, you have to be aware almost continuously whether you're doing the right thing or not. And not allow the defilements of the mind to take over and steer you in the wrong direction. This is how important it is. It's fundamental. So much of the Buddhist path is about these things. And that is why I feel really bad when I see this gee, because I haven't said enough about sila. It's really terrible. Where was I when I wrote this book? That is really awful. So that sequence that I'm talking about in that book actually begins with sila, established in sila, beginning with sila, you get non-remorse. From non-remorse, you get gladness, pamoja, and then it goes all the way from that. So sila is everything. Sila is the thing that makes the whole thing work. And once sila is established properly, the whole thing just takes off by itself. There's nothing more you have to do. There's no willpower required, no intention required. The path works by itself as long as sila is established. It's like magic, yeah? It's this whole thing that kind of carries, just works in its own way. So very, very important. It really cannot be overstated. And the more you kind of get that, the more you start to be so careful in your daily life about how you think, how you look at other people, your perceptions, everything. Everything matters. And every time you get things wrong, every time you think in the wrong way about something, you're taking one step backwards. Yeah, you're kind of detracting from the path, and you're kind of losing sight of what really matters in life. This is the meaning of life we're dealing with here. If you want to have a meaningful life, if you want to do something that actually transcends ordinary existence, that gives life real meaning, this is where it is found. Everything else in life, all the ordinary things, are kind of a little bit hollow. They don't get you anywhere. They don't really go forward anywhere. This is what gets you somewhere. This is the purpose of life. This is what life is all about. Be kind, meditate, get into some deep samadhi, get some insights, and see the world for what it actually is. All right. Next question. Okay, what would be the right practice if one experiences very strong feelings which causes disturbing reactions of mind and body? It depends on what those feelings are. Yeah, so you have to know yourself where those feelings come from, and whether if they make you angry, for example. If it is anger, well, that is one way of dealing with them. But if it is attachments and desires, there's another way of dealing with these things. So it's usually one of those. Maybe it could be fear or anxiety. Yeah, fear and anxiety are very closely related to each other. A lot of people seem to suffer from these things these days, anxiety in particular. But really it comes down to those things I've just been talking about. You have to learn to try to redirect your mind, look at things in a new way. I know a lot of young people these days, they seem to be having seems to be kind of an epidemic of all kind of mental problems that people have. And I think maybe a lot of that, I think maybe social media has large responsibility for these kind of things. Yeah, get off Instagram straight away. It is bad for you. I don't even know anything much about Instagram because it's not something, I don't actually use social media at all, except for, I use email, of course, but not any social media. So, these things are really, have all kinds of problems. So notice how these things affect you, and then if you have the ability, then just get off it straight away and never kind of look back. But some of these things take a long time to overcome. Yeah, I mean, some of these things are very deep-seated anxieties. And if it is very deep-seated emotional problems, sometimes it might be useful to have a psychologist who can kind of speak to you now and again, give you some good advice on how to move in the right direction. Sometimes there's a bit of stigma in society seeing a psychologist, but there shouldn't really be, because it's just someone to talk to guide you in the right direction. Everyone can do with a psychologist every now and again, because we all go through emotions that are troublesome in our lives. So there's nothing really wrong with that. And sometimes that can be more useful than trying to practice Buddhism, because Buddhism doesn't give you the detailed answers to some of these questions. So, and then of course, just start practicing the Buddhist path, start to change your view about things. What is anxiety? Anxiety is always a fear about the future. That's why you're anxious. Yeah, you look at the way the world is going. Perhaps you could say in one way there is good grounds for being a bit anxious. And that is why it is so useful to have a different refuge, to have a refuge within them. Yeah? So essentially the Buddhist path is also the solution to that anxiety, because you change what is important to you. You change where you actually look for refuge, where you look for happiness, where you look for solidity, something you can hold on to, something that actually is reliable. And so that can be, and I think it is actually, in the end, a very powerful solution to the problem of anxiety. Because once you start living well, you start to feel good about the future. It's one of those things, you know that if you live well, the future is going to be bright for you. There's no need to be anxious about anything, because when you treat other people well, you feel a sense of self-worth, a sense of self-esteem. It comes naturally with the territory. You feel good about yourself if you are kind to others. It's a very, very powerful thing that happen simply through the act of kindness. And then when you feel a sense of self-worth, you feel a sense of a bright mind within, you kind of know that the future is going to be good. You don't have any doubt about that. And of course, when you have no doubt that the future is going to be good, then anxiety tends to gradually disappear. Yeah, gradually over time it goes away. So the whole Buddhist practice, taking refuge in the right way, all of that overcomes these issues that everyone is dealing with, it seems. So again, it depends a lot on what kind of feelings you are feeling, but any kind of feeling gradually will be overcome by a general practice of this path, as long as you do it in the right way. You don't use willpower and other silly powers. Use the good powers, the wisdom power. All right. So we go to the next one. Oh, this is a long one. This is a short essay. We'll see what happens. Dear Ajahn, I was wondering, what do you think about animals feeling our metta to them? Today, I was walking down the alley between the bison fields, mentally chanting the Metta Sutta and really having that feeling, all of them get closer and really feeling that. This made me think about asking for your opinion, as from my experience, it works, even with insects, but I really have metta, even for months of flies. Seem to feel it, and often they just sit on my hand so I can let them out of the room. That's a very wise thing to do, is that I make them sit on my hand and then take them out of the room. That's a very smart trick. Yeah. Sometimes I start to think that it's crazy, but well, it's happening. Yeah. If you could share your thoughts, I really appreciate that. Yes, I think that is true. I think animals can feel your metta. I think probably anyone, people can feel the metta. Insects probably as well. Maybe they can feel it a bit less because they are much less evolved, obviously. But indeed, these are things that kind of emanate somehow into the world around you. And you know that's true. Yeah? I mean, you know, if you are in the presence of someone who is very kind, that has a lot of kindness, you feel that. You feel good in their presence. Again, I was just talking earlier on about this monk in Thailand called Ajahn Brahmali, who was the Ajahn Chah's nephew, and he's a very good friend of Ajahn Brahmali, who's been staying at Bodhidharma Monastery for many months. And he are these people that you just want to hang around. Yeah, you just sit there and you see all the people come and visit it, and they just sit there, and they kind of just bathe in this metta. Yeah, they don't need to ask any questions, and all the questions go out the window, and just Ajahn, don't go and sit there, and we will sit next to you. That's all we want to do. And it's actually it's kind of really nice. Yeah, and he's this kind of monk. I mean, he must be close. old is he now? Like 70 or just over 70 or whatever. He's a short little man, really overweight, yeah, can barely walk, and he has this enormous smile on his face. And he says, and when he speaks, it's like, sometimes he speaks in ways that are so sweet. He says things like, okay. And everyone kind of giggles in his presence. But he also is very wise. There's many wise things to say as well. But you can certainly feel the metta when he is there. And very often you will notice that you feel, in some people's presence, you feel really good. In other people's presence, you feel also good. Yeah? You kind of want to go away sometimes when people get really upset and angry. Yeah? And so metta is very, I think, very discernible. And sometimes it has to do with body language. Yeah, the animals can probably tell from your body language that you are on a peaceful mission. You're not here to create a war for the bisons. Yeah, you are here you're coming in peace. And they can probably, we can kind of feel that just from the body language. But then there's also the kind of more mental powers, yeah, mind-to-mind powers. And I must admit, I'm pretty sure the world is far more mental than we actually realize. Yeah, we think that the world is physical. We think that there is a distinction between the mind and the physical world, and that kind of, traditionally in the kind of science, they have been very dismissive of the mind. But I think that is where science has gone dramatically wrong. I think there is a correction happening in science of the recent maybe decade or two, and coming be more and more powerful, when they're actually starting to realize the significance of mind. And they have been overlooking that for a very long time. And so I don't think we should underestimate the power of also a direct transmission, mind to mind, yeah, and how the mind actually affects us, our own body, of course, but also people and animals around us, and even, as you say, insects at the end of the day. Yeah. So I fully agree with that. I think this is a very important thing. Sometimes we need to be a little bit independent in how we view the world. Not be too kind of caught up in it's a fine balance, yeah, because we don't want to become stupid either. We don't want to kind of reject good science and reject kind of good things. And we also want to know the limits of science and when not to kind of accept it fully. There's a fine line between becoming a stupid spiritual and a wise spiritual. There's lots of stupid spiritual people in the world. But there's also people who adhere too much to kind of the opinions of scientists, which sometimes we need to realize are limited. They're limited by scientific findings, and those findings are limited by opinions that go beyond the findings of science. That's where scientists often can go wrong. Yeah. So, yes. Okay, I hope that answers your question. So let's come down to this one here. Is physical contact like hugging or greeting common or avoided in Buddhist communities? Is physical like hugging or greeting common or avoided? It's really entirely up to you. There is no kind of wrong or right about these things. I remember that there is a distinction between Buddhist ideas and what you might call more ideas that belong to certain communities, yeah, or belong to certain cultures, cultural ideas. These are different things. And there are ideas that are Buddhist, and there are ideas, for example, that belong to certain cultures, like the culture of Thailand. Thailand, one of the most Buddhist countries in the world. What happened to the Thai history then? Over there, okay, relaxing. Okay, they are okay. Maybe we can later on maybe discuss more, because Thai culture is a certain way, very heavily influenced by East Asia, East Asian kind of ways of being. So it's a mixture of Buddhism and the kind of local culture of Thailand. Yeah? So you need to look at, if you want to look at purely at Buddhist things, of course, there's nothing wrong with hugging. Yeah, hugging is very much a Western kind of thing. It is not so common in places like some parts of the world, especially between strangers. Yeah, much less common. But these things are all good. Yeah, and I think physical contact is actually a very positive thing. We need a bit of physical contact between each other. Too little physical contact is bad for people. And this can be one of the maybe downfalls of monastic communities. It's good to kind of have it, even between males, you kind of have a bit of physical contact, because I think it's just good for mentally a positive thing. And without that, I think it can be sometimes be a bit dangerous. If you will hug somebody, hug someone out of kindness, not out of anger. This is really the critical thing that decides whether anything is right or wrong. Where are you coming from? What is driving your action? That is really the critical thing. So do anything you do it out of kindness. If you do it out of kindness, out of compassion, out of care for yourself, for the other person, it's always going to be good. If you know the other person doesn't want to be hugged, but you're going to hug them anyway because I'm going to get them. That is when it's kind of becomes dodgy, and you shouldn't really be doing it. All right, so we have come to the last question for tonight. What is it? Okay, I have to.
We have one more.
One more. Okay, only one more. Okay, good. So I know what's going on. Reserved. Okay. Okay. So, what is meant by situational awareness? I'm interested in how I might apply that to bodily pain and be unperturbed by it. Okay, thank you. Situational awareness is Bhante Sujato's slightly eccentric translation of Sampradanya. He's a bit eccentric as a monk, but I like eccentric people because they are kind of interesting and they think a bit differently. But it's also quite accurate in many ways, because Sampajana, the main way it is described in the suttas, is having awareness of how you do things in daily life. Having awareness of whether you're doing the right thing, I think that is appropriate, that reduces the defilements, that increases good qualities. So this is so everything you do will have an effect on you one way or another. So you do things with this situational awareness. Are you doing what is appropriate to the situation you are in? When you eat, that is, you have situational awareness in regard to eating. What is that? Well, it means that you eat something that is healthy, you eat the right amount, not too little, not too much. And sometimes people think that eating nothing is a good idea, but actually it is more like finding that balance, that middle way. People tend to be extreme. Either we eat nothing or we overeat. And middle ways is very hard to find. So you are aware of what we're doing, what is healthy, what works for your body, because we will have different bodies and what works and what. And that it means situational awareness in terms of eating. Situational awareness in terms of speaking means you speak what is appropriate at any time. You are silent when it is appropriate to be silent. Situational awareness, knowing what is appropriate, what is right. This is really what is meant. But Sampajana or Sampajanya is actually more than that, because you also take it into your meditation as well. And this is why we're just reading out the Satipatthana formula before. One of the qualities that you bring into Satipatthana is you have to be Sampajana. And Sampajana, in terms of meditation, means that you are aware whether you're doing the right thing. Are you focusing on the meditation object? Are you fantasizing about something? Are you in the past regretting something you did, or are you in the future planning the future? These sort of things. You have an awareness of whether you're actually doing what is appropriate for the meditation. How you might apply this to bodily pain and be unperturbed by it, situational awareness. Bodily pain is hard to deal with, and it is not easy to overcome. One of the, it depends on what kind of bodily pain you have. One of the most important, I think, pieces of advice for meditation practice: do not sit with too much pain, because you're going to destroy the joy of meditation very quickly if you do that. If you do find that you have bodily pain, try a different way of sitting there. Yeah, you can sit on one cushion, or two cushions, or three cushions. Sometimes you keep see people who have like a row of cushions around them, yeah, behind, under the feet, under everything. Yeah. And that's okay. You're allowed to do that on these things, on these retreats. You can use one of these meditation benches like some people have over here. Yeah, some people really, really like meditation benches, and they're really good for some people. You can use a chair. Yeah, we have chairs over here. And if you want to, you can use a sofa. So you can sofas. Sometimes you need to really relax. Yeah, and you can take a sofa. I was speaking to someone this afternoon who said that whenever he meditates, he has this kind of really nice meditation, and the chair and all these cushions and a sofa or whatever. So I said, I told them that why don't you use the sofas over here? We have sofas here as well. So you try them out, and that's okay for a while. Yeah, at least get established. And then there will be a time when you feel that your meditation is coming together, and you will then want to sit maybe cross-legged, or sit on the floor again, or use something else. You have to pace yourself. You have to know what is appropriate for your mind state right here and right now. Where is your mind at? How strong is your mindfulness? Are you ready to sit cross-legged, or are you not? Should you relax more in the sofa? Should you, whatever we do in meditation really depends on where the mind is at right now. And sometimes the mind may be full of defilement. Maybe you are angry or upset about something. Don't try to sit meditation if that is the case. Overcome the ill will first of all, because it's just going to drive you crazy if you try to sit with that for too long. Overcome it, make your mind reasonably peaceful, then come back in here and do the meditation practice. Or you have some crazy fantasies. Yeah? Very common in meditation to have all kinds of fantasies. And some of those fantasies can be extremely disturbing and make you very agitated, very restless. Get out and do something else. Don't sit there too long with these kind of things, because it's not going to work out. So be wise about these things. Meditation is not the panacea for everything that overcomes all problems. In fact, that's exactly what it is not. The Buddha describes meditation in the sutta, and he said you should establish mindfulness before you meditate. What that means is when you sit down, your mind should be fairly even already. You should be in a good space, that you are able to stay with the breath, able to stay with the meditation object, whatever it is. So it is so important to be skillful about these things, and then you are likely to have success, and you'll have far less suffering on the path if you do it in this way. But so this is bodily pain. If the bodily pain is more of a kind of permanent type, and you can't get rid of it, is a pain that is always there, then it is much more difficult. So I'm not sure exactly what kind of pain you're having. If it is a pain that can be managed by moving, please manage it. If you cannot manage it by moving, then what you have to do is you have to learn to be accepting of the pain, not try to change it, because that trying to change it will be much more disturbing than the pain itself. And that is very easy to say, not so easy to do. I'm aware of that, obviously, but that is really kind of how you, what you have to kind of gradually try to do to overcome the problem. All right. Oh, okay. So yes, please.
Ajahn, what exactly changes once one becomes a faith/Dhamma follower?
What exactly changes? So faith and Dhamma follower, these are sutta-retreat Dhamma in Pali. These are, like, in Buddhism, we talk about the Aryas, the noble ones. Noble ones are those who have an insight into the Buddhist teachings. And they come in 8 different kinds. And this is kind of the very first one, the very first kind of kind. The Dhamma follower and the faith follower. And what changes, it seems, that as I understand the suttas, is that once you are a Dhamma follower and a faith follower, you have enough insight that you are incapable of taking any specific thing in the world as permanent, as self, and as happiness. So it's actually a profound state of wisdom that comes with that. You're not yet a stream mentor because you haven't yet made the kind of the further understand that everything is like that. But if you look at specific things, you will not take anything specific in the world. You will not misunderstand it if you look at specific things. So that is really how you would kind of gauge roughly whether you have achieved these things. And one of the great things about being a faithful Dhamma follower is that you are guaranteed to become a stream mentor before you die. But it is very hard to know whether you are a Dhamma follower or a faith follower. In fact, it's probably impossible to know because it's not like a big, massive change. It's not like a revolution in your consciousness. Yeah? It is more like just a kind of gradual thing that just happens. And because of that, you don't really know. Yeah. So when you become a stream mentor, that's when the fetters, the 10 fetters that we have, so 3 of those fetters are overcome when you become a stream mentor. Those 3 fetters are overcome. First 3 are overcome when you become a first, because they are overcome. It is like a revolution in your consciousness. The world is turned upside down. You know that you are a stream mentor because it's a massive change. Whereas Sadhanusari, Dhammanusari, don't really matter. Something may have happened. You may have some clue that you are a slightly different person from what you were. But actually, this does not seem to be any clear-cut point at which this happens. That is an indication that you don't take anything in the world, you don't see it in the wrong way anymore. You see all things in the world, or specific things that you look at in terms of the 3 characteristics of suffering, permanent suffering and non-self. Okay, so I think I all talked out. Something Ajahn tells me time to be quiet. So I wish you all a very good night. Please have a wonderful rest. Keep on enjoying yourself, and we'll see you back again tomorrow morning. Should we do the Arahant Sammasambuddha at this point? That's a nice thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's do the Arahant Sammasambuddha. Is that in the chanting?
It is in
book?
chanting.
Is
I
it?
don't
Yeah.
know which page, the closing chant.
Somewhere in there. This is like just paying homage to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha in a slightly more formal way than just bowing. So
Let's see where it is. Page 22.
Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivade Bhagavato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami